Hello again and welcome to another of the Slimmr video podcasts. And this one is really important, looking after your brain. I think so many of us are very keen to do this because many of us fear brain ill health even more than we fear physical ill health, don't we? So anything we can do to keep the brain happy, I think, is a very good thing. I mentioned this particular study when in a previous video podcast, which I did on exercise, but I'd like to mention it again only because it is really important in the development of how people perceive what is good for the brain. I think this study took place round about the turn of the century, or a bit later, maybe 2004. I read about it around 2007, I think. Anyway, this is what happened. It was in America, and they took some pretty unfit and sedentary people, a whole group of them, aged 60 to 79. And what they did was they gave them all physical health tests, everything you can imagine, blood tests and lung function, everything. They also scanned their brains. Then they randomly divided them into two groups. The first group, for 6 months, were asked to do gentle stretching, not very much movement, but, just keep flexible, I suppose. And that's what they did, 3 times a week, an hour at a time. The other group were asked to go on treadmills for 6 months, for an hour at a time, 3 times a week. Now, as you would expect, at the end of 6 months, the fitter group, or the ones that have been doing all this exercise, came out top on all the physical tests, and their lung function in particular had increased by something like 16%. So it was all good news. But when they scanned their brains again, their brains looked younger than they had 6 months previously. This was quite groundbreaking stuff at the time. And what had happened was that the volume of the brain, towards the front of the brain here, had increased in volume. And it used to be, that people thought it was all downhill after 25. You couldn't ever improve your brain. And this demonstrated amply that that was not the case. And it also demonstrated that if you want to do something really good for your brain, puzzles and all of those things are great. But the best thing you can do is exercise. So please file that away. What sort of exercise, do I hear you ask? Well, I think you could say that anything that is good for your heart would be good for your brain. So take your pick of what you do, but keep as active as you can. The next thing I want to talk to you about is hydration, because this often gets missed, I think. Now, the brain is 73% water. And I read recently that even if your levels of hydration drop by a small margin as something like 2%, you can already begin to feel a bit vague, a bit lacking in coordination, a bit foggy, not quite yourself. 2% isn't very much. So this week I found something in a site by the Mayo Clinic, who are a world-famous clinic, as you probably know, in America, and they said that to keep the brain happy, and the body too, I suppose, women should be drinking 2.7 litres of water a day, and men should be drinking 3.7. Now, to put that into terms that would be easier to remember, here's a water jug, and I have filled it to half a litre. So what this means really is, if you're a woman, you should be drinking over 5 of these a day, are you? If you're a man, you should be drinking over 7 of these a day. So that puts it in context. And that, if you really want to look after your brain and keep it hydrated, is something to remember. I'd like to talk briefly about dementia now. There was an important study by the Alzheimer's Society last year. And in it, they said, and I thought this was a staggering thing actually, 40% of dementias are preventable. What? That seems extraordinary. Do you know what that means in terms of people? It means that if that 40% every year did not get dementia, that would be more than 83,000 people a year in the UK who would not get dementia. I mean, that's staggering. Now, don't want to be too simplistic about this, because if you start doing all the right things now, I can't say for sure that you're not going to get dementia. But if we all observed the lifestyle changes that the Alzheimer's Society were recommending, we could do a lot of benefit for, give our bodies and brains a good benefit that they're not getting at the moment. So one of the things that the Alzheimer's Society said is that exercise is key, which we now know, but they also said that people are drinking far too much. Most people are drinking far too much. And there is this form of dementia called alcohol-related brain damage. Unlike other dementias, it is reversible to a certain degree, and you might want to think about that, because really none of us should be drinking more than the recommended levels of around 14 units a week. And so many people, particularly if they've been in professions where there's been a lot of drinking, they're still drinking heavily in retirement. So have a think about your alcohol limits if you really want to benefit your brain. What else? Well, puzzles, Sudoku, code words, all of that, learning a foreign language, learning a musical instrument, going dancing, reading, all those things are good for the brain. So the more you can do, the better. Hobbies are very good, because when we get really absorbed in a hobby, it's almost like meditation. Our breathing slows, we're very focused, we're calm. This is a tonic for the brain. So your hobbies could actually really help your brain. Apparently, if you like photography, then you come out top of the list of a hobby that could benefit your brain. I don't know why, but that's what the research said. Also, if you have grandchildren, a lot of what we do with our grandchildren happens to be good for the brain. Board games are very good, and also video games. Now, I know from experience that you are never going to win a video game against a grandson. That goes without saying, but you can have a lot of fun trying, and the use of your sort of dexterity plus your brain, it's apparently a real workout for the brain, so, and it's quite a palatable one, so why not do it? Finally, your social network. Friends and family are so important in terms of your brain, and one of the reasons for that is that when we're with people that we care for, we generate more of the bonding hormone, oxytocin, in our bloodstreams and brains. And that oxytocin is very good at fighting off stress chemicals, which are not so good for the brain. So friends and family are not just really nice to have, but they're also very beneficial for our brains and our well-being. So that is something, another thing to file away. Thank you very much for listening. I look forward to seeing you next time.